We are live. It is Tuesday, March 11th, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8:02 a.m. and I am alone today, abandoned by all my co-hosts, bereft of company. I don't have a guest. Who knows? Maybe somebody will show up, maybe not. But I'm here, and that means we are talking with you guys. The phones, as they used to say when we had phones and when there was call-in radio, are open. You know, I don't even have a monologue today because, it's just one of those things. It's an irregular day. I'm sitting here in the hammock with the Ukrainian flag in back of me and a cup of coffee and just waiting for somebody to pop in and give me something to talk about. All right, Argentina. It is everything it's cracked up to be. Good meat. The meat is really serious. Buenos Aires is gorgeous. That's all I gotta say. Linda says Nazi refugees, but that's true. But there's also a lot of other stuff, and besides, the Nazi refugees are all dead, and the Jewish community there is not dead. So again, we outlived them. All right. Hyperinflation, pshaw. All right. What has been going on here while I've been away? Well, I don't know, because I tried to ignore it all. And I went to a nice, stable country with a history of normal governance, Argentina. And I just hung out and, there were a lot of zeros after every price, I admit it. And I came back and I was pleased to see that global entry still works. I went through in Houston in record time. None of my planes crashed. So, Sean Duffy, hats off. And when I got to Washington, Dulles Airport was more or less functioning as normal. So governance goes on in the United States. Now, John Hawkinson asks, was Ben successful at ignorance? And the answer to that is sort of. I did miss a lot, and I, ignored a fair bit. But the nature of, as you know, international communications being these days is that my phone really doesn't care what country it's in. I suppose if we were in, Burundi or, it might I might get fewer alerts, but I was not good at the ignorance thing. It just kind of, came at me, and I was trying to keep up with some emails. So I don't think I did ignorance all that well. But, being in a different place is good. Seeing different things when you go outside, all good. All right. So, The phones are open. This hour is going to work a whole lot better if people there's 22 of you, so somebody's going to have to be the first to hit that. You don't need to tell me what your question is, just jump on. And if you guys force John Hawkinson to be the first one by nobody else doing it, I will be very disappointed, not because I'm upset to see John Hawkinson ever, but because I want you all to be actively involved. And so, I want John to be the third person. And that means that two people have to do it before John. And that creates, of course, a collective action problem because everybody sitting there watching this or listening to it is thinking, oh, there's 20 other people besides me and John Hawkinson, and so one of them will do it, or two of them will do it. And the problem is that if you have 20 people thinking that at the same time, then yeah, and some of you, like Matt C, are going to be like, hey, this one's not on me. It's 5:07 where I am, and I'm barely conscious. And, someone else is going to be saying in Finland, oh, it's the middle of the afternoon and I'm at work. I understand that you all have good reasons, but hey, that is your all's problem. And I can't help you with that. So um, Meanwhile, John Hawkinson is sitting there thinking, wait a minute, how did I become the prototype of the guy who Ben doesn't want to hear from because he's the guy who sits in the front of the class and always raises his hand? And the answer is, John, you're uh, the guy sitting in the front of the class with his hand up. And I love that. But sometimes we have to say, let's not always see the same hands. And notice that when you say that to the John Hawkinson / Hermione Granger of the class, everybody else shuts up so as to make that person's situation as maximally difficult as possible. John, of course, you are welcome at any time. I am just ribbing you because I have to talk for 51 minutes straight without asking Ev, who is stuck on a train right now in rural Ontario, what she's thinking about this morning. And I have to do it without asking the cactus for, 10 seconds of comic relief. And I have to do it. And so, sometimes when you do that, when you just improvise like that, you see somebody's name scrolling through the chat and you make jokes about them. Hello, John.
Good morning, Ben. I think the Hermione Granger in law school metaphor is an interesting one. So I am not offended. I am amused, though possibly just a small bit concerned. How are you today?
Why are you concerned? Things work
Uh,
out well for Hermione.
well, I think the way we view Harry Potter has kind of changed in recent years, and because of the way we view J.K. Rowling, and I don't know.
But none of it gets taken out on Hermione.
Um, I'm not so sure, but anyway, I'll need some time to think about it.
All right. What's on your mind this morning?
Well, I guess trolley
What
prop.
makes you tick? Frank wants to know.
What makes me tick? Oh, many have asked, few have answered, and even fewer. It's not helpful. Um, well, habeas corpus petitions, Jesse Furman. That's one thing, and on the other hand, SNL took on trolley problems, and that's
Well,
also.
so I that last sentence was entirely gibberish to me. So, do you want to talk habeas or do you want to explain that sentence to me?
Well, mean, really, I could do either. I should also note, lest you fear that you lost someone in your morning banter, we went from 22 to 21 because I turned off my phone to avoid echo. Uh,
So
and,
you had us going on two different.
it's the only way to get people's last names in the chat because the Riverside platform just has amusingly fun quirks.
Interesting. How
Um,
many other people, if you are one of those people who's doubling up like John is, admit it right now in the chat so that I can be accurate in my assessment of how many people are there.
I can reveal to you that at times Richard Wattenbarger has been known to appear in the chat with two different names on the same day. And I think that is a good indicator of using multiple devices. I hope you will
Interesting.
forgive my outing him.
Well, so that is interesting to know. I have to say that I think people should put this on all their devices, uh, and all over their houses, so that we have so that we juice our numbers. Because if we can get regularly to 35, um, then that's where the magic's going to happen. We're going to break through. So we're now like off and around 25. We should be at 35. And that's when the advertisers are going to come in, and so I'm just saying, if you have extra devices to turn on to in lieu of fun, and Dog Shirt TV with different, it would be good if I knew the name of my own show. Um,
Hard.
if you you know did different names with several different names with a bunch of different devices. This is, people juice their Amazon numbers. I want to juice the live numbers here.
Oh, it also used to be the case, but it changed recently that on a mobile device you would get the number of actual participants, whereas on a browser you would only get the number of panelists. So there used to be two reasons for this behavior, but it's been reduced to one.
Interesting. Well, taking away our incentive here. No, I have to say, all jokes aside, I have no optimal number for the number that appears next to my live rec. It's currently at 24. If it were at 4, that would be fine with me. If it were at 200, that would be fine with me, although the chat might be a little bit crowded. Um,
Oh,
and
also, I had meant to mention on in your Harry Potter theme, perhaps, and I think this is the right reference, but I'm really not a Harry Potter expert. Perhaps Richard has been drinking the Polyjuice potion, and that may explain the multiple Richards.
Interesting. It has been a while since I've read a Harry Potter book, really since my children were little enough to have me read one to them. So I don't pretend to remember what a polyjuice potion is, but I take it replicates you.
Well, I believe it changes your appearance to someone else's appearance, but my recollection is similarly vague. I probably read it when it came out and not since.
Well, my I think a replicating Ben Wittes potion, whether that's called polyjuice or something else, would be great. I could send one to Argentina and one could
Well,
lie around
to be
here.
fair, that's how you began. There were two of you on the screen at once, and you were saying different things. So I, of course, met Richard replicating himself on multiple devices, but we could also have two Benjamin Wittises.
Yeah, that's actually easy to do. I mean, I can create another Benjamin Wittes but the trick is to be able to control them both with my own mind, rather than a recorded Benjamin Wittes and a live Benjamin Wittes, but to have two live Benjamin Wittises, um, that's what I'm going for, really.
Well, the trick will then be to know which ones are truly live and whether there's a tape delay or, a hall of mirrors. Speaking of halls of mirrors, we could get to the trolley problem. I don't know if you want to set it up for the since this is not in lieu of fun, we can't presume audience familiarity with the trolley problem.
Oh, I think the trolley problem is ubiquitous enough that we can assume. one trolley tracks, switchman, inexplicably people lying on the tracks waiting to be run over. Do you passively let five people get run over, or choose to execute the one who's on the other one by throwing the switch? Why you are set up as the switchman, I've never understood. You're not the person lying on the tracks. Why the trolley, why there are people bound and gagged on the tracks anyway, never explained. But that's the trolley problem.
Right. So, and this, of course, is relevant to the dog shirt show because the prior incarnation, in lieu of fun, had an occasional focus on the trolley problem as relates to everything. One could call it, I don't know, a mascot might be pushing it a little bit, but
Although I did notice the New Yorker had a trolley problem cartoon the other day, um, which I sent to Scott Shapiro, which was um, two trolleys talking about a third trolley. And, it just said, like, I'm concerned about death. And the title was Trolley Problems. Um,
I see. Well, I don't think I saw that. I'll take a look for it, but I dropped a link in the chat to the YouTube clip from Saturday Night Live, not this weekend, but the weekend prior, uh, where the trolley problem was the focus of a weekend update segment about, would you truly, do you love someone enough to kill five people by throwing the trolley switch to save their life? And does that represent, are you a rational person or a crazy person to do such a thing?
See, I've never understood why the solution to the trolley problem isn't to throw yourself in front of the trolley, and thereby derail the trolley. And then, therefore, there's nobility in the solution,
Do you
not
want the
merely,
engineering answer to that or, the emotional one?
well, let's start with the engineering
Well, the
answer.
engineering answer is the trolley would kill you and then go on to kill the five people, and you would have achieved nothing other than perhaps a lack of awareness of the outcome.
Which is not nothing. You get a noble death trying. You could throw the switch to the one and then throw yourself in so that you're not asking the one to do anything you wouldn't do. And, oh, by the way, can't you run and push the one, throw the switch and run and push the one off the tracks?
Well,
The trolleys don't move that fast.
trolleys, we just had the here in Boston, or the Boston metropolitan area, since I'm in Cambridge. But we just recently had the NTSB release a report on a Green Line trolley runaway. Maybe runaway is excessive. No one was killed, but $6 million of damage was done. I think trolleys can go at this runaway trolley was going at 30 miles an hour, which doesn't seem like a lot, or 35 or something in a 25 zone. The point is to say, trolleys can't go all that fast, but they can go a lot faster than you or I can go, especially if the problem is structured properly. Often it's left unsaid many of the critical details in these philosophical problems, like you have actually, not only have the others been strapped down to the tracks, you have been strapped down to the switch.
Yeah, okay. But I mean, you can adjust the problem, but I just think you've got time to think about it, right? You're standing at the switch. And by the way, if you're strapped down, there's like a weird evil mastermind going on, like sort of,
Absolutely. That's the
and
unspoken truth of this problem.
I really want to focus on the villain here. Who is strapping people down to tracks? Um, and in like rows, and why are they cooperating with this?
I mean, I think there's a metaphor for domestic politics here. To which then the response would be, where are the Canadians in the trolley problem? Are they like the ones watching on TV and they think that it's fake and they don't imagine it could possibly be true that this thing they're watching, they think it's some kind of weird, you know, morality play, but actually it's really what's going on. Their television is not, in fact, a television, but is a window over the border.
Right. I mean, look, the Canadians continue, they have a new prime minister now, and since we have neither Ev nor
Congratulations
Elite,
to Mark Carney.
yeah, but I do think that we should maybe defer Canada bashing until Alicia's here, because the satisfaction of watching her indignant as we talk about Canada is actually worth deferring the entire Canadian discussion until our Canadian co-hosts are here.
That's true, although I don't know what to make of your, unequal treatment of Ev here.
Well, Ev doesn't respond with shock and dismay. I mean, she has a
She
frankly a
shows more
better poker
equanimity,
face
or one might
than
say
Alicia.
equanimity.
Yes, you might say that. Um, besides, we have an agenda for the next time Ev appears on a show, which is how she accidentally ended up on a 4-day train ride um, uh, over the last few days. Um, and I'm not going to say more about it than that, but there's a reason why Ev is not here today, and that it is that she is actually stuck on a train from which on which she has been for like 3 or 4 days
Well, I don't want to spoil it, but I do want to ask on which side of the international border she may lie.
on the Canadian side.
Okay, well, that's a relief.
And she is safe. She is doing fine, but she is mostly out of internet range because she's stuck on a train. And the story of how she ended up getting stuck on a train is a riveting one. And as soon as she is back in safely in Montreal and within internet range, we're going to hear it.
Excellent. It has been a long time, I think, since I've been stuck on a train, and my train riding has only increased in frequency, so I find it a little puzzling. But I guess, random events strike as random events strike.
Random events strike, and it's going to be, I don't, we're doing teasers right now, so yeah, we're going to hear from Ev about how she ended up stuck on a train, I think for 4 nights. It's a long train ride.
Wow.
And so yeah, that's going to be I don't know, tomorrow or the next day whenever she gets off the train. um and Alicia is in some far off climb right now. So but we're going to have the Canadians back to talk about the latest in Canadian politics um once they are no longer abroad or stuck on trains or whatever. But I'm going to defer all Canadian jokes because, like, it's like telling, jokes about, I don't know, it's like telling jokes about, Argentinians with no Argentinians around.
Isn't Birch Canadian? I think there's at least one Canadian in the chat, but I nonetheless I do agree with you.
Well, Canadians in the chat should come on screen. I do note that there are that John is still the only one who's pressed that button. Guys, show up. Um, so
We could go
yeah,
back to
habeas.
habeas. Uh,
Well, I assume you're thinking about the Palestinian student at Columbia who's been yanked from his apartment and his lawful permanent resident status has been revoked.
well, I think that is a little premature to claim, but yes.
Well, let's just say that that is the position of the executive branch, which is currently holding him in detention.
I don't even know if that's true. I mean, I think we're really operating on a dearth of facts here, and perhaps they are too. We know he's been abducted by them. We don't fully understand the basis. Um, there is, and maybe we should, I don't know, provide more information for everyone or a little context. But yeah, so I believe his name is Mahmoud Khalil,
Yeah.
and there's his role in the Colombia Palestinian protests is a little bit unclear to me. He's been characterized both as a protester but also as a mediator. Um, but regardless, yeah, ICE agents came to his housing and or they were in the lobby when he returned home and had him identify himself, and then separated him from his 8 months pregnant wife and took him away.
And told him in the presence of his wife that his student visa had been revoked. And he said, I'm not a student. I'm not here on a student visa. I'm an LPR, a lawful permanent resident, and was told after moments of confusion that that had been revoked as well. And his lawyer was subsequently told that they had no further information on that subject. So that's um, where we think that information, that's the exchange that I was referring to. There has been a habeas petition filed.
At
The
4:40
government has,
a.m. on a Sunday, by the way, which is
right, which is
impressive
what you
on,
expect from your lawyers.
well, impressive on the one hand, but on the other hand, uh, you know, SDNY has an emergency procedure that I'm not super familiar with that they call by the lovingly affectionate name Part 1, for getting judges to take action on things really fast. And that procedure was not invoked, with the result that the case wasn't assigned till something like 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday. And having seen some of these ICE deportation processes go, sometimes taking, you know, 30 hours to respond is not enough time to allow the judicial system to have any input whatsoever into what happens. So I was a little surprised by that, but
Right.
but
So
as
the
it may.
status of the case, at least as of when I was reading last night, is that the judge had entered what is called a jurisdiction protecting order, basically saying you can't deport him in order to moot out the case. And there's been some briefings scheduled. Is that where we are?
That's approximately right. I don't know that there's briefing scheduled per se, but there's a hearing tomorrow, and the judge is Jesse Furman, who is, a pretty notable, uh, you know, up there judge.
Yep, good judge.
Um, and the maybe I should, use this opportunity to rail against Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 5.2C, which, as I'm sure everyone, all 24 people in the chat as well as you, well know, restricts public access to immigration cases such that you cannot go on Pacer and download the documents except for the judicial opinions in the case, and that usually that makes a lot of sense because immigration issues contain private information. Maybe they contain asylum information. They're fast moving, so there isn't time for counsel to think carefully about what they want to seal and not seal and move to seal. But for cases of significant interest or significant national interest, it can make it awfully annoying to keep track of things.
Yeah, so I generally don't follow immigration cases. I often do follow habeas cases. And this rule, I do not, I've never seen it in a habeas case.
Oh, let me tell you, it is, you see it in immigration habeas all the
Really?
time. In fact, anytime you file in Pacer a suit with nature of suit code 463, which is the 2241 habeas for immigration cases, it automatically introduces this restriction.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah.
The
I learned
habeas,
that a lot of that 8 years ago as I started paying attention to a lot of habeas cases around here.
interesting. That's super interesting, and I did not know that. Um, so, okay, do you agree with me, John, that this case boils down to two questions that are um, uh, distinct but interrelated in one another. One is, under what circumstances can the executive branch simply annul somebody's lawful permanent resident status, if any? And number two, what process attaches to that?
Um, I think so, but it could, for instance, boil down to what happens when ICE officers show up to arrest someone they think has a student visa and ignore facts that tell them that person doesn't have a student visa. Like, what if it's also a weird mistake and
And
uh,
then they're covering for the weird mistake.
yeah, now I don't know that that's the likely interpretation. I guess it's the charitable interpretation.
Uh,
Uh,
I'm not sure if it is charity. I'm not sure which is worse, to be
I,
honest. So,
I'm not either.
so let's hypothesize the former because it is actually a more important case if it's the former, right? There are a
That's why it's
bunch.
scarier.
Right. There are not that many people who ICE is going to accidentally show up at their house because they think they're on student visas, but they're actually LPRs. That's a quirky, weird thing if it happened and it needs to be corrected, but it affects this guy and this guy alone. If the president or his designee can point at you and say, I don't like your activities as an LPR, we're going to deport you, that gets into some Emma Goldman territory, to go back 100 years, and that's super dangerous. Um, Now, my impression, and I'm not an immigration law expert, is that it cannot be right that, like, so I have no doubt that there are activities that you can engage in other than criminal activities as an LPR that can get you deported. But that a to be deported, have your LPR status revoked because the administration doesn't like your First Amendment protected activities, strikes me as somewhere between dangerous and unthinkable. And I'm curious whether, off the top of your head, you know of any other cases where purely First Amendment protected activity without more, without going back to Emma Goldman, right, is a basis to pick somebody up off the street and deport them from the country. I cannot think of such a case. I'm curious if you can.
I cannot. So I did put a link to Steve Vladek's Substack on this in the chat, and he talks about some of the legal issues, and and that's a little bit there. It goes a little bit beyond the First Amendment because apparently, um, an alien whose presence or activities in the United States, who the Secretary of State has reasonable ground to believe would potentially have severe foreign policy consequences for the United States, is deportable. Uh,
And that's, I assume, the McCarran Walter stuff.
that I'm not sure of.
Yeah, I think that's a 50s era statute called the McCarran Walter Act, which was basically used to deport communists. But I'm not sure. I may be mistaking that
Well,
for.
there's also another one that renders deportable anyone who, or any non-citizen who endorses or espouses terrorist activity or persuades others to do so or support a terrorist organization.
So, and the support there, I take it, is not material support.
Well,
It's.
not that word is not used because I wouldn't want lawfare to have to alter its its taglines.
Oh, well, no, no. We use the word material support very self-consciously. The unwritten slogan is, it is a criminal offense to provide material support for a terrorist organization. It is a virtue to provide material support to national security publications. Right. So I believe, let me see if I can reconstruct uh, my 90s immigration law history. By the way, I am making this up as I speak. So any factual errors, misinterpretations should be attributed to John Hawkinson, not to me. Um,
The INA is tough, Ben.
all right. So in the 50s, there was a statute passed called the McCarran-Walter Act. Yes, it is the same McCarran as he was a senator from Nevada, and the believe the Las Vegas airport is named after him. That's neither here nor there. But McCarran-Walter basically said if you espouse international communism, you can be deported as an LPR. And that statute has always been of, I don't know if it's dubious constitutionality, but people have scratched their heads about it for a long time. So in the,
And it's worth stopping for a moment to point out the problem with these is you don't know what they mean.
correct.
And it seems like it's very easy to pick and choose who you want to persecute and decide that they've done something that might fall under one of these statutes, and that looks very much like an authoritarian regime.
Yes. So then in the 19, I think it's the 80s, there is a case that is colloquially known as the LA 8 case or the Los Angeles 8 case, which involves a group of activists, Palestinian activists in Los Angeles who are associated with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. They end up in deportation proceedings because the PFLP is, among other things, uh, an international, or at least was at the time, had some notional affiliation with communism or socialism, and so they were proceeded against under this McCarran-Walters Act. This does not go well for the government, and so in the, I believe, again, making all this up, any errors should be attributed to John. In the 1996 or maybe earlier Anti-Terrorism Act, there is a provision that adds to this or supports international terrorism. And it is an effort to graft a terrorist nexus onto this communism thing. And I believe that is the statute um, that you know, is at issue here. And so the argument would be this guy helped lead the protests at Columbia, therefore he's pro Hamas, therefore he's pro terrorist, and therefore he's deportable on that basis. And of course, the problem with that analysis, and I say this as somebody who, I am in no sense a supporter of the encampments or at Columbia, which really did involve, you know, pardon me, terrorizing a bunch of Orthodox Jewish students who were grossly mistreated on the Columbia campus. That said, supporting um, uh, opposing Israeli policy is not the same as being pro-Hamas, and being pro-Palestinian uh, is not the same as being pro-Hamas. And so
And
I
also,
think,
being pro Hamas is not the same as supporting a terrorist organization, although
well, it
it's a
depends
lot
how
closer.
material the support has to be, right?
That's right.
And so the question becomes a very granular one of what did this guy actually do and say? What did he do and say about terrorism and about Hamas? And does that conduct or speech constitute support that is sufficiently material to apply this statute in a fashion that is constitutional. And that, of course, requires knowing what kind of support is adequate
Well, I want
for.
to disagree a little bit there. Before you even get to getting to these factual questions, you have to acknowledge that when the government can pick someone up before they can have any of those questions adjudicated, uh, and just take them to jail, take them to New Jersey, which is like jail but isn't jail, and then take them to Louisiana, which is even more like jail without habeas protections for some weird reason because the immigration lawyers are all too far away. I don't understand Louisiana. Um, Before you even begin to recite the facts, it almost doesn't matter what the facts are. And
So I'm not sure. Well, I'm sure that's right as a moral and ethical matter. I'm not sure that's right as a matter of immigration law. So if you think about other bases for once you are found to be deportable, say because you are a criminal, you have a criminal history, or you have or you're a visa overstay, and and I mean,
just
you
to be clear,
are
when you say found to be
arrestable.
deportable, you mean like a final order of removal from an immigration judge, or you mean a determination by the executive branch?
I mean, a determination by the executive branch. I mean, you are arrestable on that basis, right? And
Sure.
so, I think there is a presumption in certain instances of detainability. Now, um, that makes sense in certain areas, like, for example, if you're a rapist. I'm not sure it makes sense in a lot of instances, but I think it is the presumptive rule. And so, I think if there's a um, I think the idea that ICE can show up and pick you up is not in and of itself all that controversial.
I think that's right. I'm a little unclear about what happens when you're an LPR and not just a regular visa holder. Honestly, because I don't know that I've seen any comparable cases. Not to say they don't exist, but I'm certainly not familiar with them.
Yeah, so the famous case of this is the so-called LA8 case. And that went on for like 20 years. And I think a lot of the law here proceeds in some sense uh, from that uh, from that incident. Now, Matt C shares 1227A4C, which provides that, quote, an alien whose presence or activities in the United States the Secretary of State has reasonable ground to believe would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States is deportable.
That's
So,
the first one I quoted earlier.
yeah,
Yes.
so that's a super, super capacious standard, and notice that um, the notice that the decision maker there is the Secretary of State, not the
So
courts,
Pete
right?
Morocco, I believe his name is.
Yes, that would be Pete Morocco, who is, also has declared himself the chairman of the board of the African Development Bank. Who knew? Um, so, I think the answer is that, and again, I'm just sort of guessing here, that if you presume the deportability finding is valid, the arrest is not in and of itself particularly legally problematic. But that it goes back to this question: what does the secretary have to do in order to figure out that an LPR meets that criteria, or the terrorist supporting criteria, or the international communism criteria, which this guy clearly doesn't fit.
It's also, then a question of the shattering of norms and what
Correct.
are our expectations for how a Secretary of State will use this authority. and to what extent has it been used and abused in the past? One little wrinkle also that you sort of, I would say, not quite glossed over, but you noted the habeas was filed while he was still in New York, or so we believe, before he was moved to New Jersey. There is a question of jurisdiction that I don't think has been clearly resolved as to whether it is sufficient uh, for a New York judge to maintain his jurisdiction, uh, that the petition be filed while the person is still in the Southern District of New York, even if he rapidly then moved out. And I don't know that there is actually a clear legal answer on this. Um, it's comforting to think that Judge Furman retains jurisdiction because the case was filed in time. I don't know that there's a solid precedent that really shows that.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question to which I don't know the answer. A good general rule of thumb is that the reason he's moved out matters.
Right.
So if you move him in order to evade the court's jurisdiction, the court might say, um, if you move him for legitimate reasons like that, Louisiana is our staging area for deporting X category of
And it
person,
is for,
then
I think, half of the countries out there.
right. So, that if you moved him for that reason, court might say, okay, go refile in Louisiana. Um, uh, but if you move him because you then get to argue that the thing is moot, that's the kind of thing that a federal district judge will, you know, carve your ass into very thin slices over.
Right. I mean, most of the way this goes down is it's filed, the judge sees it, the judge issues a don't remove him order, and then we find out he's on a plane already, or the
But we know
timeline is
he's
different
still
here.
in the country, right?
Correct. Yes. Yes. I didn't mean to imply an international plane. Uh, but
All right,
yes.
so, let's take bets. Is this a loser for the Trump administration or is it a winner for the Trump administration? Or is it yet a third category, which is win by losing?
You know, I will say, when I looked at the Kyle Cheney and Josh Gerstein tweets on this, I made the mistake of looking at the replies, and I was quite surprised
I know exactly where this is going.
at how negative uh, the replies were. And I do not mean to suggest that I believe Twitter to be some kind of representative of the way the country thinks. Uh, but nonetheless, I was still surprised, and that is to say, uh, although this case has gotten a lot of attention, I think there may well be a sizable portion of people who, uh, probably without real understanding of the law and of the First Amendment issues involved, uh, think that he should be removed as soon as possible. So that to say, I think it's pretty tough to. It could well be one of those cases where uh, win by losing in multiple ways. The Trump administration might gain a lot of popular support if they ultimately lose in court, and then that support might translate into substantial opposition from the immigration community in unpredictable ways. I really don't know. I was expecting you to force me to put some percentages on something, and that would almost be easier.
Right. No, I gotta say, I think this is a win by losing situation. I find it hard to believe. Look, the administration has some statutory law on its side that is, as we discussed, capacious. And the more capaciously you read it, the more challenging it is from a constitutional perspective. Um, but uh, I also, not that I've dived deep into the subject, have not seen any suggestion that this guy did anything violent or that he was a particular supporter of Hamas as opposed to an opponent of the Israeli military operation. Under those circumstances, I suspect that the administration is going to have actual trouble deporting him, notwithstanding the statutory law. Um, I also think that the median voter is going to find that outrageous. Um, and that this is an area where the pinheaded people like us who think about the details of immigration law and fairness to uh, individuals who are LPRs who have strong political opinions on matters of U.S. foreign policy are simply wildly out of step with the median voter who, and look, I say this as somebody who's, you know, A, Jewish and B, not particularly sympathetic to the encampment movement at places like Colombia. I think we are probably wildly out of step with where the average voter is, which is to say, a sense of uh, we're much less pro-Israel than the median voter, and we're much more pro-First Amendment vis-a-vis Palestinian protesters at elite universities. And I do suspect this is an area where the administration could get its butt kicked in court, and the average, the not the average voter, but the median voter finds that outrageous.
I think that's true. As we're winding down, I do want to note also that I think we're starting to enter a different phase of the litigation in the Trump administration because TROs are now becoming PIs, and those PIs are getting appealed, and now there's a meaningful number of PI appeals out there, and some of them are going to change uh, the outcomes.
Yes. So that is exactly right. Um, and we are for those for whom the acronyms TROs and PIs are
Initialisms, please, because acronyms have to be pronounced. Tros and pies
pros
are
and
acronyms.
ips, yeah. Um, and P's, pies. So a TRO, is an order, a temporary restraining order is an order that tries to preserve the status quo while you're litigating a question over a very short period of time. And when John talks about TROs turning into preliminary injunctions, a preliminary injunction is a longer term order um, that you know, a court is going to, an appeals court is going to take a much closer look at than they will at a TRO because it's supposed to govern over the long haul while the court is trying to figure out whether the policy in question is lawful. TROs are generally not appealable. The government has successfully appealed a couple of them anyway. Uh, uh, in one case, gotten it overturned, and in another case, not, but it did get the question sort of heard. And PIs are presumptively appealable. And so at this point, you're going to see a bunch of these questions the turn into appealable questions that the DC Circuit in particular, but other appeals courts as well, and then the Supreme Court are going to have to consider. The government is going to win some of those. And It tends to be losing at the TRO phase, and in front of a lot of district judges has been also losing, though not all, at the preliminary injunction phase. It's going to win on some of these appeals, and that's going to change the landscape a bit. Um, so, yeah, I agree. But the other thing is that the matters that it loses on um, will become then undone, um, uh, assuming that you can get the government to follow certain orders.
Which
But
seems
for
to be a
example,
hard thing lately.
yes, but as a precedential matter anyway. And so, for example, let's take one that the government is losing on in every court, which is the birthright citizenship matter. You're not hearing much about birthright citizenship anymore. And
And
the reason is that the government is losing on it in an authoritative kind of way.
it's also an importantly different kind of thing than the federal funding freeze litigation, in that even if birthright citizenship were removed from small infants, which it has not yet been, but even if it were, that could be reversed without, you know, needing to rehire fired people and reconstitute 501c3s that have gone under, and re-alive people who have been unalived by horrible things in all parts of the world. It is something that is reversible in a different kind of way.
That's right. And the another way to say the same thing is to say that when you enter a PI on the birthright citizenship matter, you are just preventing the government from doing anything. You're not requiring the government to do anything. On the spending side, once you enter a PI saying you're not allowed to freeze all this spending, you have a whole lot of implementation questions because they've already done a bunch of stuff. So, how do you undo this is a technical legal term, the fucking up of the payment system, right? How do you figure out which parts of the payment freeze are and are not covered by stuff? So, there's a million implementation questions, each of which ends up having to be litigated. That's true of some of these policy matters and not true of others. If you freeze hey, you're not allowed to discharge trans people from the military for being trans, that doesn't require a gazillion implementation questions. So that one you've not been hearing that much about. But there's a lot of these cases once you enter PIs, there are really important PI implementation questions.
Another aspect of the
Last
calendar.
word, John. This is you get the last word today.
Well, another aspect of the calendar I had not considered, but Jeff mentioned in the chat, is that we have a potential impending government shutdown arriving on Pi Day. Historically, DOJ has not tended to continue to litigate cases during government shutdowns if they can avoid it. I guess I would not expect this DOJ to behave the same way in these high impact litigation cases, but it might be a weird thing for the calendar.
Excellent point. We are going to leave it there, people. I don't know who it's going to be, but we're going to have a guest tomorrow. But it is great that we can just kind of summon John Hawkinson like Satan. You just invoke his name and he shows up.
I
Uh, uh,
refuse to be the first guest tomorrow. It
all right.
will not happen, no
Will
matter
not
what
happen.
you
John will
say.
not be the first guest tomorrow, but maybe Ev will be back and she can tell you her protracted train story. Maybe, it'll be Minna Allender. We don't know who it's going to be. Maybe it'll be somebody you've never heard of before who I've plucked off the street because I've said, hey, John has promised not to be the first viewer on the show. It's going to be you. Um, anyway, we're going to be back. So don't cry for me, Argentina. I had really good meat, and the wedding was lovely, and I will see you all tomorrow.
Farewell.